Good afternoon, everyone. This is Jeff Rumberg. I'm a managing partner with MetricNet, and I will be your host for today's webcast on call center best practices. I want to welcome all of you and thank you for participating in our webcast today. Before we get started, I have just a few administrative announcements to make. During the presentation, all of you will be in listen-only mode. However, if you have any questions during the webcast, you can type them in the dialog box that appears in the lower right corner of your screen. I will pause once during the presentation to answer questions. Additionally, I will remain on the webcast at the conclusion of the presentation to answer any final questions that you might have or that I did not get to during the first Q&A break. This webcast typically lasts about 90 minutes. So for those who have other commitments later in the day, I should be wrapped up by about 3:30 or so Eastern Time in the United States. Now, I see that quite a few of our existing clients have joined us on the webcast today, and I want to thank you for that. For those who are not familiar with MetricNet, let me give you just a brief introduction. MetricNet's core business is benchmarking. We perform benchmarks for a variety of industries and functional areas. My role in the company is to manage the call center, service desk, and desktop support benchmarks and client relationships for MetricNet. The work we do for call centers worldwide spans the gambit, from benchmarking and best practice assessments to consolidation studies and outsourcing analyses. Typically, the call centers that we work with are looking to optimize their performance, and we help them achieve that objective through benchmarking. Now, for those who have not been to our new website yet, I would encourage you to go and take a look around at MetricNet.com. One of the unique features of the website is that we offer a free membership that gives you unlimited access to all of our content. This includes our Metric of the Month, our webcast recordings, white papers, and presentations. All you have to do is complete a short form, and you will be enrolled as a free member. Each time you visit our website thereafter, you can go directly to our resource library to access all of our online content absolutely free of charge. Now, since the question of how to benchmark comes up in every webcast we conduct, I'll preempt that question right now and give you just a brief overview of MetricNet's benchmarking lineup. There are three ways that you can complete a benchmark with MetricNet. First, we have what are called peer group benchmarks that compare your call center, service desk, or desktop support performance to that of a unique peer group. These are our custom benchmarks, and they're very comprehensive in scope. The peer groups are selected from our benchmarking database based upon your call center's scope, scale, complexity, and geography. For example, it's common to select a peer group from your geography and vertical industry, and to also ensure that there is comparability in the number of contacts handled, since call centers are scale sensitive. Secondly, if you're only interested in industry benchmarking data, you can download an industry benchmarking report directly from our website. Just go to MetricNet.com, click the Shop button, a shop selection that is, in the upper navigation bar, and you will see our call center, service desk, and desktop support industry benchmarks that are available for download. And finally, for those do-it-yourselfers, you can purchase a benchmarking data file in Excel format and conduct your own benchmarking analysis. Now, regardless of how and when you choose to benchmark your organization, I want to encourage all of you to connect with MetricNet on social media. We're active on all the major social media sites. We put out a steady stream of posts, tweets, articles, discussions, and presentations that are designed to enrich the community of call center and IT support professionals and to provide you with tools, insights, and information that you can use to enhance your professional careers. For those who would like to follow us on Twitter during the webcast, use hashtag MetricNetLive to participate and share your thoughts, key points, questions, or just follow along. One final note before we get started, and this is particularly important for those who wish to receive a copy of today's presentation. When you exit the webcast, a brief survey will pop up on your screen. Please be aware that only those who complete the survey will receive a copy of today's presentation. This survey provides us with valuable feedback on the webcast. It's only 3 questions long, and it takes about 15 seconds to complete. So if you do us a favor and answer that survey at the end of the webcast, I'd be very grateful, and in return for that courtesy, I will send you a copy of today's presentation. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. We've got 4 things on the agenda for today. We're going to start with what I call the customer contact imperative. And we're going to talk a little bit about how call centers have evolved away in the last 10 years from tactical support functions to, in many cases, a strategic source of competitive advantage. We'll spend a few minutes on that topic, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about what I call our research methodology. I'm going to be presenting a lot of data in today's presentation, and I think it's helpful to understand where that data has come from. There again, I'll spend just a few minutes because where I want to spend the bulk of my time today is on our model for call center best practices, which addresses metrics, diagnosis using benchmarking, prescription or action planning, and then the implementation of those action plans. This is where we'll spend most of our time in today's webcast. And then I'll wrap up at the end with a call to action and some tips and pointers on what you can do in the near term, i.e. next 7 to 10 days, to gain some benefit immediately from today's webcast. So let's go ahead and get started with the customer contact imperative. All of you know, if you've been working for any time at all, that every industry is in transition and every company or government organization or MPO faces increasing pressure from a whole lot of different sources. In many industries, there's consolidation going on. There's now more regulatory scrutiny than there has ever been in the past. We've got the emergence of virtual businesses. We see this in banking and other types of businesses. Customers, in many cases, expect one-stop shopping when they go to your website or when they contact the contact center. For those of you that are publicly traded, there's shareholder pressure, there's budgetary constraints, customers grow increasingly demanding over time, and customers have greater choice and leverage than ever before. But in the midst of all of this, companies are beginning to rediscover the possibility of creating a competitive advantage at the customer interface. And so they're recognizing the growing importance of customer contact as an opportunity to build a sustainable competitive advantage. Now, if you think about it, on average, you're contacting your mortgage company, your banker, your insurance company, your credit card company. It might be once, twice a month, sometimes less than that, but on average, these organizations are only talking to their customers for a limited period of time. It's estimated that they talk to their customers on average between 7 and 22 minutes per year. Now think about that. When you call your retail bank, or when you call your mortgage company, or when you call your insurance company or your credit card company, you expect them to be available 24/7. So the expectation is that they will provide anytime, anyplace service 8,760 hours per year. Yet when you're only talking to them between 7 and 22 minutes per year, that represents a real moment of truth opportunity. And the contact center can either create loyalty and build positive word-of-mouth referrals and potentially even build market share and repeat business through those limited contacts, or they can do just the opposite. This is a high leverage opportunity to build that loyalty, to build repeat business, to build positive word-of-mouth referrals, but it's also a high leverage opportunity to do just the opposite of that. And so what we want to talk about today is how you take these limited opportunities, these moments of truth, and you leverage those into a competitive advantage for your organization. As the recognition of this has set in over the last 5 to 7 years, the old paradigm of managing contact centers has given way to a very new and different paradigm. The old paradigm viewed the call center as a support function. Many of our clients even referred to it, in some cases, I hate to say this, but they refer to their contact centers as a necessary evil. We have to have them because those pesky customers keep contacting us about different things. They were viewed historically as a supplement to traditional brick-and-mortar facilities like a walk-in office, a walk-in insurance office, for example, or a walk-in retail bank. But in many cases, these call centers were playing catch-up to customer needs and expectations. They were managed very reactively. And in this environment, the goal was mere customer satisfaction. The new paradigm turns this old paradigm on its head and says, in effect, that what we want to do is create value at this interface. We want to differentiate our company's products and services by virtue of the quality of service that we offer. So it doesn't matter if the customer thinks insurance is a commodity or credit cards are a commodity or that mortgages are a commodity. We're going to uncommoditize that by offering a level of quality of service at the customer contact point that is unmistakable, that will drive customer satisfaction, or even better, customer enthusiasm, and product differentiation. In this new paradigm, the service that goes along with the product is considered two sides of the same coin. So you've got the product and you've got the service that goes along with it. And they become indistinguishable in this new paradigm. And the quality of service has the potential to differentiate what might otherwise be considered a commodity product. And in fact, it's been demonstrated now that increasingly customer buying decisions are based, at least in part, on the expectation of the quality of service that will come after that initial product purchase is made. So this new paradigm is replacing the old paradigm. Now, it was more than a dozen years ago, a client sent this comic to me. And what it reads is, delight customers, why can't we just satisfy them like we used to? Well, the reason is that satisfied customers are not loyal customers. They're not necessarily customers that are choosing to do business with you. They're doing business with you because they have to. But as I pointed out on the prior page, what we're after here is customer enthusiasm. These are customers that want to do business with you, that are sticky to this channel, that is, they're loyal to you, and they're going to be propagating positive word-of-mouth referrals, and as a result, you can potentially build market share and grow revenue as a result of the quality of the customer service that you provide. Now, what we have seen in this industry is that contact centers tend to evolve through three stages. Newer contact centers and contact centers that have not evolved very far tend to operate in what we call the support paradigm or the support stage. These call centers are oftentimes very chaotic. They're oftentimes focused almost exclusively on service levels. However, at some point, many of these call centers begin to recognize that there's got to be a better way to do things, and they start making investments in training and tools and technology that enable them to become more proactive. And those that are the most successful in this migration, in this evolution, become what we call strategic stage call centers, and it's the strategic stage call centers that are focused on creating value, differentiation, and driving customer enthusiasm. And as much as anything else, today's webcast is about helping you understand these different phases of evolution and taking the steps that are necessary to help you evolve as quickly and efficiently and effectively as you possibly can. Our research, unfortunately, shows that fully almost 2/3 of call centers worldwide operate in this traditional customer contact paradigm, the so-called support stage. Another 30%, almost 1/3, are in this transitional, sometimes called the growth stage, where they are making these investments in training and tools and technology. But only about 5% of call centers worldwide, based on our research, truly operate strategically, where the contact center is a competitive advantage, where the contact center does represent a source of differentiation and helps to drive product sales, customer loyalty, and repeat business. Let's talk briefly now about the research methodology. I personally have been at this for a long time, more than a quarter of a century. And during that time, I've had the opportunity to work on more than 2,000, almost 3,000 contact center benchmarks. Now, as a result, we've created the most comprehensive database of call center performance and process indicators in the industry. We track more than 30 KPIs, everything from cost per contact and speed of answer to customer satisfaction and first contact resolution rate. We have also cataloged and created a taxonomy of nearly 80 industry best practices. These best practices address everything from call center strategy and human resources to technology, stakeholder communication, and performance measurement and management. Now, one of the things I want to point out that of the nearly 3,000 call centers that have been profiled worldwide, we cover just about every 3-digit SIC code. We cover a lot of different industries, including banks and financial services, telecom, healthcare, hospitality, insurance, manufacturing, retail, transportation, utilities, and other industries. And it's important to point out that the best practices that we have identified amongst call centers worldwide are relatively independent of the industry. In fact, I would go so far as to say that regardless of which vertical market you're in, there is at least 80% commonality from industry to industry in the best practices that we will be presenting here today. Now, since we use the term world-class quite a bit, I do want to define what a world-class call center is. The first component of our definition is this. You have to have high levels of customer satisfaction, meaning that you have to deliver high-quality service. Secondly, cost matters. And so we like to see that cost per contact is below industry average levels and that the revenue generated, if you are in a revenue-generating call center like telemarketing and telesales or collections, we like to see that the revenue generated is above industry average levels on a per call or per agent basis. So the first part is high quality. Second part, low cost, high revenue. Third part, a bit more subjective. You're following industry best practices. And this is not a hard thing to do now because the industry best practices are pretty well defined and documented. We like to see that the call center is following industry best practices. And then perhaps most subjectively of all, that every transaction adds value. This means that the customer has a positive experience, it improves their loyalty to you and to this channel, and it creates positive brand awareness and switching costs. So there are 4 components of that definition. Now graphically, I would describe it as such. If we look at a 2-dimensional chart where we've got cost per contact on the x-axis and quality measured by customer satisfaction on the y-axis, we get a locus of points as illustrated by these blue circles here. Now, most contact centers are going to operate somewhere in the range of this, what we call the average performance curve, which is this dashed line. Only those that are fully optimized operate on this upper curve. We call this the best-in-class performance curve. Now, we get asked almost every day what it means to be best-in-class or what it means to be world-class. Does it mean that my abandonment rate has to be under 1%, that my cost per call has to be under $5, that customer satisfaction has to be above 90%? Well, the answer is it depends. It depends on the resources you have at your disposal. If you're spending $2 or $3 per call and manage to eke out a reasonable level of customer satisfaction, what that means is that you are doing the absolute best job you can with the limited resources that you have, and we would consider that to be a world-class call center. Likewise, if you're spending $100 or $200 per contact and you manage to achieve the best possible result with the resources you have, that would also be considered a world-class contact center. So there is no absolute definition of what it means to be world-class. It's a relative definition relative to the resources that you have at your disposal. And the real question is this: are you using the limited dollars, headcount, technology, office space, and all the other resources you have and deploying those in such a way that you achieve the best possible result? If you are a world-class call center. Now, I want to point out a couple of other things about this particular chart. You will notice that there is a relationship between cost and customer satisfaction, or cost and quality. That is not a spurious correlation. That is a cause and effect relationship. And in some cases, organizations will drive quality based on cost constraints, meaning that cost drives quality. In other organizations, quality will drive cost because the organization is trying to hit some minimum level of quality, and that in turn will dictate what the costs are. But the relationship is nonlinear, which suggests that as quality increases, cost increases disproportionately. Now, this is not a surprise. This is true of just about any product or service that you might purchase. Typically, as the quality goes up, cost goes up disproportionately. It's true when you buy homes, cars, seats on airplanes, or anything else. As the quality goes up, so too does the cost. So there are diminishing returns. And what that says is that you can never afford 0 defects. You can never afford 100% customer satisfaction. You have to recognize that you can never get to perfection. It would simply be too expensive. Most organizations tend to operate in this midpoint here, slope of about 45 degrees, where I guess that would mean that the derivative is 1 at that point, where cost and quality are in equilibrium, meaning that they're in healthy tension with each other. And make no mistake about it, cost and quality do create a tension within an organization, and the trick is to find the point of minimum tension, the point where you are achieving the best possible quality with the resources that you have at your disposal. Now that leads me to the first polling question of our webcast. Let me go ahead and open that polling question, and as you can imagine, it's going to address what it means to be world-class. And so the first polling question of the day is this: do you consider your call center to be world-class based on the way I've just defined it? Do you consider your call center to be world-class? Now, while you're answering that, just want to shout out to a few of you who've joined us today. And by the way, we've got individuals from more than 20 countries on our webcast today. Some of you are dialing in the middle of the night in places like Singapore and Japan and Australia. I appreciate that. Thank you so much. I want to welcome Andrea Lusher, and I'm just picking these names at random. Thanks for joining us. There's Eric Rodriguez. Eric, great to see you. Jeff Augustino, thanks for joining us. Leo Gillis, great to have you here. Nancy Pigeon, thanks for coming. Great to see you here. Paul Valenzuela, great to see you. Okay, we've got almost 90% of you weighed in on this question. If you haven't answered the polling question yet, do you consider your call center to be world-class? Please answer the polling question. We'll wrap up this poll, and I'll show you the results right now. Okay, this is a fairly typical result. 25% of you, based on the definition that I've just provided, consider your call center to be world-class. Another 62% of you do not consider your call centers to be world-class, so it's about a 2-to-1 ratio or almost 3-to-1 ratio of no's to yeses. And then 13% not applicable, presumably because you don't actually operate in a call center environment. And again, this is a fairly typical result. The good news is that if you're not yet world-class, there's a relatively straightforward path to get there. It doesn't have to take a lot of time. It doesn't have to cost a lot of money. And the roadmap that I lay out over the next hour here does, in fact, provide you with those markers, with that path that you can travel and move forward on to achieve world-class performance in a relatively short period of time without spending an inordinate amount of resources. So thank you for participating in that poll. We're going to go ahead and move on now. And at this point, we're going to switch gears and begin talking about our model for best practices, which addresses performance measurement, diagnosis, that is interpreting the measures, prescription, which is action planning, and then where the rubber meets the road, implementation. So we've got a 4-part model here, all arrayed around the central objective, not of customer satisfaction, which, as I told you earlier, is a losing proposition, but arrayed around the central objective of customer enthusiasm. That is what we are after. It's those loyal customers, those sticky customers, the customers that will come back to us time and time again and will propagate positive word-of-mouth referrals and help us grow our market share and our revenue. Now, the 4 components of the model, measurement, diagnosis, prescription, and implementation, are synergistic. That is, they are self-reinforcing. You can be just average in each of these 4 areas, and you will have a world-class call center. By contrast, if you are excellent in 3 of the 4 areas and weak in a 4th area, you will not have a world-class call center. All it takes is slightly above average performance in each of these 4 areas in order to have a world-class contact center. Now, let me give you a medical analogy here to make this model come alive. And by the way, the model is very, very empirical in nature. It reflects what we have seen in the industry time and time and time again. So it's a very simple model, but one that's very powerful and reflects empirically what we see in the industry. Now, if you go to see a doctor, one of the first things that doctor is going to do, whether you're there for a physical or because you're not feeling well, what have you, they're going to take some measurements. They might measure your blood pressure, your temperature. They might do an EKG. They might do some blood work. But it typically starts with measurement. But a good doctor isn't going to say, oh, gosh, you're sick. Your temperature's high. Your blood pressure's elevated. Go home and get better. A good doctor is going to look at that information and develop a diagnosis. That is, that doctor is going to determine what is going on with you. Then what they're going to do is prescribe something, not necessarily drugs, but it could be. It might be a prescription for change in lifestyle, like stop smoking, stop drinking, sleep more, whatever it might be. It might be a prescription for surgery. It might be a prescription for drugs. But there's a prescription that follows that diagnosis, and it's up to you, the patient, to implement that prescription so that you, in fact, get the benefits of that measurement, that diagnosis, and that prescription. So it is a continuous process of measurement, diagnosis, prescription, and implementation in the call center, all arrayed around the central objective, once again, not of customer satisfaction, but of customer enthusiasm. That is what we are after, our enthusiastic, loyal customers that want to be doing business with us. So we're going to go through each one of the components of the model, talking about performance measurement, diagnosing what those measures mean, developing action plans, which is part 3, prescription, and then implementing those action plans. Let me start by bifurcating the 2 types of call center metrics. We have what are called operational metrics, which are those metrics that you use to manage your call center internally. You're probably familiar with a lot of them, things like cost per contact, customer satisfaction, speed of answer, and so on. And then we have what are called business effectiveness metrics. And these measure how effective you are in supporting the company's business mission. Oftentimes they are P&L related or revenue related. They're generally externally focused. Typical examples would include, for example, sales generated per call center headcount. Might be collections generated per call center headcount. It could be call center operating expense as a % of call center revenue generated. But it's important to recognize that there is a distinction between these 2. Operational metrics are for running your call center internally and making it as effective as it can be. The business effectiveness metrics are about how well you are supporting the company's business mission. Now we're going to look at each of these independently. We're going to start by looking at the operational metrics. Here on page 26, I've listed 25 of the most common key performance indicators in the operational arena. We've got cost metrics, quality metrics, productivity metrics, agent metrics, service level and call handling metrics. Now this is not all inclusive. There are literally hundreds of key performance indicators in addition to what I've shown right here. But these represent what we see most often in this industry. But it does present an issue, and the issue is this. That's a lot of data to keep track of. That's a lot of metrics, and it points out a common problem in this industry, which historically is this. Organizations track way too many metrics and don't do much with them. They don't do much analysis. They don't do much action planning, and as a result, they never take any action, or they take very little action. But as you move up this pyramid, the value increases. That's what this arrow is showing here. And a handful of organizations that we have worked with, and an increasing number of organizations over the last 3 to 5 years, have basically turned this pyramid upside down. And they're saying, in effect, that when it comes to performance measurement, less is more. What we need are a handful of metrics that we doggedly track, but that we also analyze very effectively and aggressively, and then develop action plans based upon those metrics. And finally, we take action based upon all of that. So the focus needs to be on action and action planning, not on measurement per se. And it's this holistic approach to managing and measuring an organization that gives you potentially a competitive advantage here. So with that in mind, here's the short list of metrics that really matter, the short list of operational metrics. We've got cost and quality as measured by cost per contact and customer satisfaction. This would be for a typical inbound customer service call center. You've got productivity metrics like agent utilization. You've got call handling metrics like FCR or first contact resolution rate. Now the cost and quality metrics are referred to as foundation metrics because ultimately everything you do in a call center boils down to one of two things. You are either containing costs or you are trying to drive a higher quality customer experience. Nothing else matters. And I know that sounds very draconian, but that's the reality. Everything you do in your call center has got to boil down to one of those two things. It doesn't matter if it's a training program, a technology decision, a hiring decision, an organizational decision. If it doesn't have the long-term effect of either reducing your costs or driving a higher quality customer experience, it just isn't worth doing. It's as simple as that. But if I'm doing an assessment or a benchmark of a call center and I find that, well, gee, the cost is high and the customer satisfaction is low, I can only impact those two metrics by their underlying drivers. And specifically, agent utilization is the primary driver of cost per contact. Call centers are labor-intensive functions, and any serious effort to contain the cost, or especially to reduce the cost, has to look at labor productivity. So agent utilization is the big driver of cost per contact. And if I want to improve the cost within a call center, typically agent utilization or human resource productivity is what you need to be looking at. Likewise, for customer satisfaction, the big driver is first contact resolution rate. And again, our example here is for an inbound customer service call center. That is, FCR drives customer satisfaction. And typically, if the customer satisfaction is not where it needs to be, you can address it by improving first contact resolution rates through training, through knowledge management systems, and other technologies that enable you to drive a higher first contact resolution rate. Then we've got agent job satisfaction. A lot of people see this as a nice to have but not necessary, but I would disagree with that. I would say that agent job satisfaction is one of the most important metrics, not as important as cost or customer satisfaction, but very close behind that is agent job satisfaction. And the reason it's so important is because it's a bellwether metric. It has a ripple effect. It has an indirect effect on almost every other metric in the call center. And what we found is that if agent job satisfaction is good, almost everything else takes care of itself. Your costs will be in line, your customer satisfaction will be good, your absenteeism rates will be low, your turnover will be reasonable to manage. So this is a very critical metric. And what we tell our call center manager clients is, we don't care if you know how to answer a call or not. We don't care if you know the difference between an abandoned call and an ACD. What we do care about is whether or not you can proactively manage your agents in such a way that you can maintain a high level of morale, which in turn translates into high levels of agent job satisfaction, because we know that's going to have a positive ripple effect throughout the organization. Finally, we've got a couple of aggregate metrics. One of them is just a two-dimensional chart showing cost versus quality, and I showed an example of one a few minutes ago. And the other is the balanced scorecard. Now, if you're interested, we do have a white paper on our website that you can download that's going to go into more detail than I've just gone into on these metrics. You can download it from MetricNet.com. It's called Call Center Performance Metrics, or the 5 most important KPIs for the call center. I'm going to go through these in a little bit more detail, starting with cost versus quality. And what I've shown on this two-dimensional chart is cost as measured by cost per contact on the x-axis, and quality as measured by customer satisfaction on the y-axis. Now, the y-axis is very intuitive. We've got lower quality down here, higher quality up here. Cost, however, I've flipped the axis. It's somewhat counterintuitive. We've got lower cost on the right, higher cost on the left. Now, the reason I did this is I wanted to create 4 quadrants. So this upper right-hand quadrant is where you have both low cost and high quality. And that is the holy grail for any call center. That is the holy grail for any service or support organization, is to be both low cost and high quality. Now, if you end up over here, what this says is that you're high quality, but you're also high cost. And over time, what you need to do is be reducing your cost to get into the upper right-hand quadrant. If you're in this lower right quadrant, it says that you are low cost, but you're also low quality. And over time, you need to figure out how to improve the quality of service so that you can get into this upper right-hand quadrant. And if you're in the lower left quadrant, where you're both high cost and low quality, you need to be taking action on both dimensions. You need to be reducing cost over time and improving the quality of service over time, so that ultimately you end up in this upper right-hand quadrant. Again, that's where you want to be. As any service and support organization, any call center wants to be both low cost and high quality. That is the holy grail of running an organization like this. Now, the second aggregate metric I referred to was the balanced scorecard. And what I'm showing on page 30 is a sample balanced scorecard put together, once again, by an inbound contact center, a client of MetricNet's. What we have in the scorecard are 5 key performance indicators as shown on the left. These represent what our client, and we agreed with them, believed to be the 5 most important metrics in the call center. They then put a weight on each of those metrics. You can see that cost and customer satisfaction are overweighted. A metric like percent of calls answered in 20 seconds has a relatively low weight of just 10%. Then for their benchmarking peer group, meaning a group of other call centers that looks like them in scope and scale and complexity and geography, we showed the worst performance for each of the 5 metrics and the best performance. So this was a peer group of approximately, what does that look like, maybe 20? Approximately 20 other call centers. We showed what the worst performance on each of these KPIs was and what the best performance on each of these KPIs was. Then our client put their own performance in the 3rd column from the right and calculated a metric score in the 2nd column from the right using this formula. It's an interpolation formula that looks at worst case minus their actual performance, that's the numerator for the metric, divided by the range, which is the worst case minus the best case. So again, it's a simple linear interpolation formula, and you will end up with a metric score that ranges between 0 and 100%. If you're at 100%, it says that you have the best score relative to a benchmarking peer group. If you're at 0%, it says you have the worst score. So the metric score gives you an indication of how far along the path you are from the worst performer to the best performer. A high score like this one on cost per contact says that they are much closer to the best end of the spectrum than they are to the worst end of the spectrum. By contrast, a low score, as they have here for the percent of calls answered in 20 seconds, says that their result, 44.1%, is much closer to the worst end of the spectrum than it is to the best end of the spectrum. The last step in constructing your scorecard is to multiply each metric score by each metric weighting to come up with a balanced score for each metric. When you add those up, you end up with a single score that will range between 0 and 100%. Now, you might look at that and think, well, what does that mean? Well, initially, when you do a balanced scorecard and set it up, the first score might not be terribly meaningful. But over time, if you are tracking this, if you're updating it monthly or at least quarterly, it's going to tell you something. If it's moving up, it says that on balance, when you look at cost and quality and productivity and agent metrics and service level metrics that on balance you are improving over time. By contrast, if the number's going down, it tells you just the opposite. So it's very good for trending. But it's also very helpful when you compare yourself to other call centers, as we've done here on page 31. As I mentioned, there's roughly 20 call centers that are being represented here. Are hypothetical. It's not hypothetical. It's a real company, but we've called them company XYZ on this chart here. Their score was 77.4%. That's the number that shows up here. They are the orange bar. All of the other bars represent other call centers that were in this benchmarking peer group. You can see that the scores range from a low of 30.8%, that's call center number 3, to a high of 78.2%, that's call center number 9. So our client actually performed quite well with a score of 77.4%. Now when we run literally hundreds or thousands of call centers worldwide through this algorithm, we end up with an average score of right around 50%. Moreover, it's a bell-shaped curve. It's a normal distribution, centered right above 50%, with tails running off to the right above 70%, tails running off to the left, typically below 30%. Anyone generally that's over 50% is at least in the second quartile for performance, and typically when you're above 60%, you are in the top quartile. So the balanced scorecard normalizes and aggregates a series of disparate metrics and gives you an overall score that you can track and trend, as this particular company did here on page 32. You can see the blue bars represent their call center scores measured and updated each month over a 12-month period of time, and the purple background represents the trailing 12-month average. So you can see that the trend was clearly in the right direction, and also when compared against a peer group of other call centers, the score was quite good. So it's valuable for trending. It's valuable for comparison purposes, that is, put you on a level playing field with other call centers, and it's also very valuable for communicating your performance to a lay audience that doesn't really know that much about call center performance. Because you've got a lot of different metrics here, and they oftentimes move in different directions. If cost goes down, but customer satisfaction also goes down, is that good or bad? Well, you don't know. But if you put it all in a scorecard like this, despite whatever direction the metrics might be moving and whatever confusion that might cause, the balanced scorecard will give you a single overall score. Consider it your letter grade for the month or for the quarter. It tells you how you're performing. It enables you to benchmark against other organizations, and it allows you to track and trend your performance over time. So that is the value of these aggregate metrics. Now I'm going to talk about these other 5 metrics in a few minutes, but before I do, remember we've got something called business effectiveness metrics, and I do want to talk about those briefly. Now these are highly dependent upon the type of services you're offered. They're really no standard set of measures, unlike the operational metrics where you typically do look at things like customer satisfaction and cost per contact and speed of answer. When it comes to business effectiveness, it will depend highly on the business that you're in. There's a lot of room here for creativity. Now, in some cases, we have found that business effectiveness becomes more important than operational effectiveness. In other words, it trumps operational effectiveness. Let me give you an example. If you've got an inbound or an outbound sales center and they're just burning the house down making a lot of sales, oftentimes management will look the other way at the operational effectiveness. In other words, they will ignore operational effectiveness. So it doesn't matter if your operational effectiveness metrics are not very good. Now, I'm not endorsing this. I'm saying that it oftentimes happens where if the business effectiveness is really strong, operational effectiveness will sometimes be ignored. And this does allow some sloppiness on the operational side of the call center, so it's something that you need to watch out for. There are also metrics that serve a purpose for both business effectiveness and operational effectiveness. Things like operating cost as a % of revenue generated is one of those crossover metrics that addresses both operational and business effectiveness. Now, just to give you a few examples of business effectiveness metrics in call centers in different industries, if you operate in a credit card call center, things like cross-sell and upsell conversion rate for every 100 calls you take from a credit card customer, what percentage of them are you able to upsell or cross-sell into, say, an identity protection program, a theft management program, insurance, or possibly a higher level card, going from a green card to a gold card or a green card to a platinum card, that kind of thing. For customers that are behind on their payments, how many payment plans do you establish? If you're in collections, What is your average balance saved? This is a measure of the percentage of an outstanding loan portfolio that you're able to collect. So if you're given a portfolio of $1 million and you collect $500,000 of that, your ABS is $500,000 or 50%. Promises kept is a common metric in a collections environment where you get a customer to make a promise. For example, I'll pay $100 by the weekend. If they keep the promise, that counts as a promise kept. If they don't keep the promise, well, that's a promise broken. And it's a fairly important metric in collections. If you work in a cable television call center, the number of appointments you can schedule for the field techs is a common metric. And the product count for new accounts. Let's say somebody calls in and they tell you they just want the basic cable package. And by the end of that call, you've sold them on an internet service, a landline, the HBO channel, perhaps some sports channels, things like that. In other words, you get the product count up to 4 or 5. That's a big deal. So the product count for new accounts is a metric that is commonly watched, and it is a business effectiveness metric that is commonly watched for call centers within the cable industry. And you can see that there are other metrics here related to lending, telecommunications service, retirement products, and the like. But again, I want to point out that there's no standard set of measures, and there's a lot of room for creativity here. I'm going to pause and answer any questions that might be queued up at this point. So if you have any questions, please type them in the dialog box, and I'll address those now. But keep in mind as well that at the conclusion of the webcast, I'm going to answer any questions. I'll stay on the webcast as long as necessary to answer any other questions that you might have. Okay, the first question here is from Porter, and thanks for joining us today, Porter. How often do you recommend surveying agent satisfaction? At least once a year, Porter, ideally twice per year. And this does not have to be a complicated process. Typically 5 questions. The most important question, the last question, is always overall, how satisfied would you say you are with your position here in the company? Scale of 1 to 5. 5 says, I love it here, couldn't think of a better job. 1 says, I can't wait to get out of here, I don't like this job at all. So generally a scale of 1 to 5, 5 questions, the last question being the most important one, which is overall, how satisfied are you with your position here? Other questions you want to include in your survey would include questions around training, career opportunities, or quality of training, amount of training, career opportunities, and the level and quality of coaching that you get. Okay. Another question. Most of those other metrics would seem pretty dynamic, but I'd assume you'd measure that one no more than quarterly. You're right about that, Porter. We recommend twice yearly. Once yearly is adequate as well. Okay, from John. Do you have a set of business-style metrics for government call centers? It really depends on what that government call center is doing, John, and whether it's an inbound call center or an outbound call center, whether it's providing simple customer service and information or providing transactions for customers. So it really depends upon what that government call center is doing. If you can be a little bit more specific or provide a little bit more information on the type of government call center, I can probably give you some examples of the business effectiveness metrics that might be used there. Okay, from Ketchum, or maybe it's Bob. It looks like the names got mixed up, so I apologize if I'm calling you by your last name. Is the PowerPoint deck available on your website? If you complete the survey at the conclusion of the presentation, you will receive a copy of today's presentation. Okay, from Gene, can you give a couple more examples of business effectiveness metrics pertaining to inbound customer call centers for IT support? Yeah, for IT support, you're talking about, for example, a help desk or a service desk. One of the most important metrics there is first level resolution. That's different from first contact resolution. First contact resolution says that when the customer calls in or there's a chat going on, that the customer gets resolution before they hang up the phone or before they conclude the chat. By contrast, first level resolution says that the ticket is resolved or the incident is resolved at level 1. It doesn't have to get pushed out to desktop support or to end-level support, which would be, for example, an application group or a NOC group or perhaps even a vendor. So level 1 resolution is a proxy for total cost of ownership. The higher the level 1 resolution rate goes, the lower the TCO, total cost of ownership, will be for IT service and support. So level 1 resolution is a critically important business effectiveness metric in a technical support environment. Okay, from Matthew, where I'm at, we actually do surveys every Monday. Okay, I'm not sure, Matthew, if you're referring to agent surveys. If you are, I would say that's probably too much. If you're talking about customer surveys and you're sampling, from customers every Monday, depends on, what the sample size is, but that's probably not too much. But if you're surveying your agents every, once a week to find out how they're doing, that to me is way too much. I would say twice a year is probably adequate, maybe once a quarter, but every Monday, I'm not sure what that sort of, almost micro-level feedback or weekly feedback is going to do for you. Okay, from Shannon. What percent of tickets is industry standard for sending customers an email to complete a survey? Well, what you want is statistical significance. You want to get to a confidence interval of like 95% on your customer surveys. So the sample size really depends upon how large your customer population is. If you've got a customer population of 100 people, the sample size will look very different than if you have a customer population of 10,000 people. So if you go to Google, just go to Google and type in the words sample size / confidence intervals, it will tell you how many people you have to sample to get to a 95% confidence interval. And again, it varies depending upon your customer base. However, the curve decays very quickly. You would think that if you have 10,000 customers, you're going to be surveying 100 times more people than if you had 100 customers, but that's not the case. To get to statistical significance with 10,000 customers versus even 5,000 customers only requires a small increase in the sample size. So the curve decays and flattens out very, very quickly. And again, I would encourage you to go online and look at confidence intervals. It assumes a normal distribution for the response, which is a pretty accurate assumption. Type in confidence intervals for customer surveying, and then there are online calculators where you can type in the size of your customer population, the confidence interval, or the level of confidence, which typically we recommend 95%, and we'll tell you how many you have to survey. Now the question becomes, how many do you survey? Because typically you don't get a great response rate. On average, what we find is that when you do an email survey, you get a response rate of somewhere between 3 and 5%. That's not real high. So what you have to do is make sure that you survey enough people to get enough completed surveys to give you that 95% confidence interval. So if you're only getting a 5% response rate, just to make up a number, and you need 200 completed surveys to get to statistical significance, a 5% completion rate, 200 surveys says you got to survey 4,000 people to get 200 completed surveys. So recognize that when you're talking about confidence intervals, it's based on customer population and the number of completed surveys. Okay, from Claro, how do you approach creating a customer satisfaction or enthusiasm survey? That's a pretty broad topic, Claro. I'd like to take that one offline. I would ask you to send me an email at info@metricnet.com, because if I could give you a 90-second answer, I would, but the topic is far broader and deeper than that. So I'd prefer to take that one offline with you. For also Ketchum Bob, or Bob Ketchum, and I apologize if I'm getting your name wrong, but do I have a set of metrics for Service Desk? The short answer is yes, we do. If you want to go to MetricNet's website, just within the last 10 days, we posted 3 ebooks that provide definitions and the most important metrics for service desks, call centers, and desktop support. If you go to our website, go to the resources library, and you will find there the ebooks listed. And again, those are for desktop support KPIs, call center KPIs, and service desk KPIs. Okay, from Pedro. How do you measure FCR in a call center? It relies on third-party partners to solve many issues. Pedro, the best thing to do to figure out what your FCR, first contact resolution rate is to embed a question in your customer satisfaction survey that asks the customer if they got resolution on first contact. Because if the customer says they did, they did. And if the customer says they didn't, regardless of what your agents may think. So self-reporting or listening to recorded calls, for example, through call sampling, that doesn't get you to the metric you need. You have to ask the customer. And so in any customer satisfaction survey, we always include a question, did you get resolution on first contact? Now, if it's a chat or a live voice call, they might be able to answer that. If it's an email, generally the industry consensus is that if the customer gets a response to the email within 60 minutes and it's an acceptable response, it's considered FCR. So you may have to define that for the customer if you're surveying your email customers or your web ticket customers. But that's kind of the de facto standard in the industry. Resolution within 1 hour for a non-live channel is considered FCR. For a live channel, it's in the eye of the beholder, meaning the customer. And if they say it was done on first contact, it was done on first contact. Okay, it looks like some other questions are queued up, but I want to make sure that I get wrapped up here by 3:30 Eastern time, so I am going to move on in our discussion now. I thank you for those questions. If you have more, please, or additional questions, please type them in the dialog box, and at the conclusion of the webcast, I will address any remaining questions. We're switching gears now. We've talked about measurement and the fact that less is more, and there's a relatively small number of measures that you need to track effectively to be considered a world-class call center. We're going to talk about diagnosis now. And the watchword here is benchmarking. There is virtually a one-to-one correlation between call centers that are world-class and call centers that are that benchmark. Now, some of them are world-class because they benchmark, and some of them benchmark because they are world-class. So this chicken or egg, you know, are they great because they benchmark or vice versa? It almost doesn't matter because we've seen some of both. But let me talk briefly about what benchmarking is if you're not familiar with the concept. It involves comparing your call center to a peer group of comparable call centers, looking at differences in things like cost per contact, customer satisfaction, speed of answer, first contact resolution rate, and the like. Now, when you find those differences, you want to understand how these comparable call centers got to a lower cost, got to a higher customer satisfaction, got to a higher first contact resolution rate, because if you understand how they scored better than you did, you can emulate them. You can selectively adopt and adapt what they are doing. Now, given enough time, any call center can improve its performance, and any call center can become world-class. The question is, how long is it going to take you? Months? Years? I would submit to you that benchmarking allows you to bypass the normal incremental approach to improvement. It allows you to bypass the trial and error associated with most improvement initiatives. It allows you to build upon the proven best practices of the industry's best performers and achieve world-class performance not at an evolutionary pace, but at a revolutionary pace. That's the value of benchmarking. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. You don't have to figure it out on your own. You don't have to go through trial and error. You don't have to improve incrementally. You can leapfrog ahead of all that, build on the industry's proven best practices, and achieve world-class performance at a revolutionary pace. Now, we do have white papers on our website around call center benchmarking, service desk benchmarking, desktop support benchmarking. I'd encourage you to go there if you want to learn more about the benchmarking methodology and take a look at those white papers. Now, very early on in this presentation, I showed you a chart much like this one where we had cost per contact on the x-axis, customer satisfaction or quality on the y-axis. And I'm using the same chart but for a different purpose. When I originally showed this chart, I was using it to define what it meant to be a world-class call center. Here, what I'm doing is explaining the value of benchmarking. You see, benchmarking wrings any inefficiency out of the call center. They say there's no free lunch. But for any organization that is not yet optimized, that is, you have excess cost in the organization or you have opportunities to improve quality of service, there is a free lunch. And benchmarking enables you to exploit that opportunity. Benchmarking enables you to eliminate costs that are unnecessary and at the same time improve the quality of service that you are delivering to your customers. That's the real value of benchmarking. It allows you to move from this average performance curve up to this best-in-class performance curve by simultaneously reducing costs in the system and improving the quality of customer service. And that brings us to our next set of polling questions. And this set of polling questions addresses benchmarking. And there's two questions that we're going to ask here. And the first question is this one. Have you benchmarked your call center in the past year? And then there's a follow-on polling question to this one. So have you benchmarked your call center in the past year? And again, I just want to thank all of you for joining us today. Go to the bottom of the list, Ziba Mercer. Great to have you here. Thanks so much for joining us. Sonia Drumgool, thanks. Great to have you here. Thanks for joining us. Miguel Casillas, Joy Joslin, Jeff Ray. It's great to see all of you here. I really appreciate it. Okay, we're up to almost 90% now on participation for this particular poll. So if you haven't weighed in on this, please let us know your thoughts. Have you benchmarked your call center within the past year? Okay. I'm going to go ahead and close that poll down and share the results with you. looks almost like the last poll. We've got 25% having benchmarked within the past year, another 59% have not benchmarked, and then 16% are not applicable, meaning presumably you're not affiliated or associated with a call center. Hey, for those of you who haven't benchmarked recently, I would encourage you to strongly consider benchmarking. As I mentioned earlier, there is roughly a 1-to-1 correlation between those call centers that benchmark and those call centers that are considered to be world-class. So I'm going to open up the next polling question, which is a follow-on to that polling question. Oops, opened the wrong dialog box there. And the next polling question is this: do you plan to benchmark your call center in the future? And there are 5 answers here. Yes, within the next 90 days. Yes, within the next 6 months. Yes, within the next year. No plans to benchmark at this time, or not applicable. So if you'd weigh in on that question, we're getting good participation. We're up to almost 60% already. So if you haven't voted, please vote on this question. Do you plan to benchmark your call center in the future? Okay, we're already at almost 90%. So if you want to weigh in on this poll, please do so. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close that poll down and share the results with you. And here's what they say. 15% of you are planning to benchmark your call center within the next 90 days, 21% within the next 6 months, 27% within the next year, and 24% have no plans to benchmark at this time. 14% not applicable, which is roughly what it was on the last polling question, which would make sense. Now, it's interesting that in the last polling question, roughly 25% said they had benchmarked within the last year, and on this polling question, almost the same number said that they don't plan to benchmark at this time. I'm hoping that that's the same group of companies, meaning that you've benchmarked within the past year, and so you don't have any current plans to benchmark in the future. And I'm hoping that the others, which looks like about, let's see, 36, somewhere around 60, 70%, are planning to benchmark within the next year. 15% in the next 90 days, 21% in the next 6 months, and 27% within the next year. And again, let me offer some words of encouragement here. For those that are considering benchmarking, I would urge you to move forward with those plans. It is the single best investment that you can make in your contact center. It doesn't take a lot of time, it doesn't cost a lot of money, but it dramatically accelerates your improvement initiatives and enables you to achieve world-class performance, not in months or years, but in weeks. So once again, I just want to encourage those of you who are planning to benchmark within the next 90 days, 6 months, or 1 year to move forward with those plans. I think you'll find that it really is an investment that will pay off for you. Okay, we're going to go ahead and move into a case study now to talk about the remaining metrics that were on that list, our short list of metrics. You may recall that cost per contact was there, customer satisfaction, technician utilization, first contact resolution rate, and agent job satisfaction were the other metrics that were on our short list. Now, what I'm showing on page 41 is real benchmarking data. However, I want to caution you against comparing your own call center to this data, because the single most important success factor in benchmarking is to make sure that you get the peer group right. You need a peer group of other call centers that look like yours. They have to be similar in scope and scale and complexity and geography. If they're not similar or identical in those respects, then the benchmarking comparison is likely to be invalid. Okay, so with that disclaimer, let me tell you what I do here. I go to cost per contact, one of the foundation metrics. They're at $28.17 per contact. The peer group, which was roughly 40 other call centers, was at $23. So we've got a high-cost call center. And by the way, this was a technical support call center. Some people refer to them as service desks or help desks. We see that their cost is high. Okay, let's look at their customer satisfaction. They're at 63% either satisfied or very satisfied. The peer group's at 79%. So we've got two pretty serious issues here. We've got high cost, and we've got low customer satisfaction. Remember that two-dimensional chart that I showed you a few slides back, cost and quality? Well, they're in the lower left quadrant. They've got costs that are way above average, and they've got customer satisfaction that is way below average. And we need to figure out why. And so what we're going to do is diagnose what's going on with this call center. Before I do that, let me point out again, on our website, go to our resource page. We have a white paper on benchmarking peer group selection, which talks about those factors I was just mentioning: scope, scale, complexity, and geography, and the single most important success factor in benchmarking, getting the peer group right. And that's why the disclaimer at the beginning of this slide, I wanted to make sure that you didn't jump the gun and just automatically compare your call center to the data that's shown on this page, because more than likely it's not going to be a valid comparison. So what we're going to do is go through a set of cause and effect diagrams that show how the different KPIs interrelate to each other, interact with each other, and drive each other, so that we can diagnose why this contact center has high cost and low customer satisfaction. So we start with the foundation metrics: cost per contact, which is an efficiency measure; customer satisfaction, which is an effectiveness measure. They are driven respectively by agent utilization and first contact resolution rate. How do we know? Well, we look at the empirical data, and in most cases it just makes common sense, I think. As agent utilization goes up, cost per contact goes down. Why? Because this is a labor-intensive function, and if you make the labor more productive, your costs are going to go down. Now, the slope here is every 2 percentage point increase in utilization yields about a 1 percentage point decrease in cost per contact. The reason the slope looks like that is because agent labor costs, that is salaries and benefits for agents, make up about 50% of the total call center cost. So it takes a 2 percentage point increase in utilization to yield a 1 percentage point decrease in cost per contact. Now, if you add up all labor, not just agents, but also supervisors, team leads, workforce schedulers, QA, QC people, trainers, and the like, your total labor component of call center is about 70%. That is more than 2/3 of your total call center costs are made up of salaries and benefits for the personnel that work in the call center, the agents plus the non-agents. And only about 1/3 of it is made up of all the other things, which would be telecommunications cost, technology expense, facilities expense, travel, training, office supplies, and other costs. So we've got a slope here where if we can improve utilization by 2 percentage points, we'll see a 1 percentage point decrease in cost per contact. Here's how we define utilization. We look at inbound contacts multiplied by their handle time, add that to outbound contacts multiplied by that handle time, and we divide it by the number of days worked in a month, which averages 21.5, number of work hours in a day, typically 7.5, multiplied by 60 minutes to get the units right. We've got an example on this page here. Average worldwide for call center utilization, believe it or not, is only about 50%. Now people look at that and say, well, what are they doing the rest of the time? Are they goofing around? Well, the answer is no. Keep in mind, we don't back out sick days, vacation days, travel time, training time, administrative time. We don't back anything out. So when we run this algorithm, when we calculate utilization for call centers worldwide, everybody is measured exactly the same way. It doesn't depend on things like vacation leave or sick days or anything like that. We're measuring everybody exactly the same way. But keep in mind that once you do back out the vacation days, the sick days, the PTO, the training time, the administrative time, and all of that, 50% utilization is actually a pretty good number, and that's about what the average is worldwide. And this particular page just shows you an example of how you would go about calculating agent utilization for your particular call center. Well, what about FCR? Remember I said that it drives customer satisfaction. Here's first contact res rate on the x-axis. Here's customer satisfaction on the y-axis. Blue diamonds are data points. The red line is a linear regression through the data. And clearly as FCR increases, so too does customer satisfaction. Okay, let's drill down further and look at service levels. This one is quite interesting, I think you'll find. If we look at average speed of answer, the lower that number goes, the higher the cost goes. Why? Well, because as you reduce the speed of answer, it means that you've got to staff up. You need more bodies to answer the phones quickly. For any of you who've worked in workforce scheduling, you know this to be true. If you go from, say, a 60-second to a 30-second speed of answer, typically you have to staff up. If you go from 30 seconds to 15 seconds, you're going to add even more headcount. So naturally, as your service levels become more aggressive, the cost goes up. The same is true of abandonment rate, as I've shown here on page 50. The lower the abandonment rate goes, the higher your cost goes, once again, because you got to staff up. But here's the real kicker. There's a mythology in this industry that you need aggressive service levels to drive customer satisfaction. You need a low speed of answer and a low abandonment rate to drive customer satisfaction. But that's not true at all, and here's the data that proves it. When we look at page 51, what we're showing is ASA versus customer satisfaction. Again, blue diamonds are data points, red line, in this case, nonlinear regression, exponential regression against the data. But the x-axis here is not just pure ASA, it's ASA divided by handle time. So if you have a 1-minute handle time, 10% of that would be 6 seconds. If you have a 10-minute handle time, 10% of that would be 1 minute. And what this chart is telling us is that as long as your ASA is less than 10% of your handle time, you're fine. You're not going to see any drop-off in customer satisfaction. But the flip side of it is it doesn't make sense to go to a lower ASA because you gain nothing in customer satisfaction. In other words, your customers do not reward you for a faster speed of answer, but they will penalize you if your ASA starts to get too much beyond 10% of the total handle time. The other thing it says is that customers are smart about how they think about ASA. When you call 411, the typical transaction time is 12 seconds. That's why you expect a 1-second answer speed. Nobody would hang out waiting for a minute for a 411 call to be picked up because the transaction time is so short. So ASA is judged in the context of the overall transaction time, and customers are smart enough to make that judgment. So as long as your ASA is 10% or less of the total handle time, you're going to be fine. But again, you don't want it, there's a sweet spot here. You want to be in the range of 8 to 10% of total handle time, because if you get too much lower than that, you're just driving up your costs. Now the same thing is true of abandonment rate. As long as you're in the range of 6 to 8% on abandonment rate, you're fine. Because if you go any lower than that, all you're doing is driving up costs, and you're doing nothing to improve customer satisfaction. But here again, customers will penalize you. When the abandonment rate gets too high, the customer satisfaction starts to drop off. Now another way of looking at this is that customers are willing to forgive you an occasional long speed of answer and an occasional abandoned call. What they will not forgive you is incompetence, as measured by first contact resolution rate. It doesn't matter how quickly you're answering the phone. You can pick the phone up in 2 seconds and have almost a 0% abandonment rate, but if the FCR is low, you're not going to get credit for that fast answer speed. It doesn't matter. Customers value competence. That's what they want. They're not into fast speeds of answer and low abandonment rates. What they want is competence. So don't overinvest in these aggressive service levels. Don't feel like you need to drive your ASA down to 1% of handle time or to 10 seconds or whatever the number might be. Don't feel that you have to drive your abandonment rate down to 1 or 2%. All you're doing is driving up your costs and doing nothing to improve customer satisfaction. Let's look at training hours and how that impacts first contact resolution rate. You know, I think training is sort of a motherhood and apple pie issue. Everybody agrees that it's a good thing to do. Everybody says that they do it. But the reality is very few walk the walk and talk the talk. But if you look at the data, if we look at new agent training hours before they're allowed to take calls independently in a call center, you can see that as that number increases, so too does the first contact resolution rate. Why is that good? Because FCR, we know, drives customer satisfaction from this chart right here. So by investing in training, you can improve FCR, first contact resolution rate. Likewise, annual training, meaning after the first year, how much training do your agents get? As that number increases, so too does the first contact resolution rate. All these blue diamonds here on the y-axis, those are companies that provide no incremental or ongoing training to their agents. Everyone to the right of that y-axis is at least providing some annual training to their agents. Let's look at agent job satisfaction and how that impacts customer satisfaction and absenteeism and turnover. And by the way, you'll notice that some of these metrics are in red. These are the metrics that were on our short list. Remember, cost per contact, customer satisfaction, the foundation metrics, driven respectively by utilization and first contact resolution rate. Agent satisfaction was on the short list because it's a bellwether metric. It has an indirect impact on a lot of other metrics. Let's look at how agent satisfaction impacts customer satisfaction and then absenteeism and turnover. As agent satisfaction improves, so too does customer satisfaction. Again, blue diamonds are data points, red line is a linear regression. As agent satisfaction improves, annual turnover drops. Why would we care about that? Because turnover is expensive. Every time you lose an agent in a call center in North America, the cost is about $10,000 because you have to find someone new, you got to recruit them, you got to train them, and then you put them out there, and it's a while before they become fully productive. The estimate is about $10,000 per agent. Every time you lose somebody, that knowledge walks out the door, and you're facing an expense of about $10,000. So agent job satisfaction is a proxy and, in fact, drives annual turnover. The higher that agent satisfaction goes, and this gets to the point I made earlier about how we advise our clients who are managing call centers, focus on agent job satisfaction, because if you do that, it takes care of a lot of other things. It will take care of turnover. it will take care of absenteeism. It will help drive your costs down, and it will help drive a higher level of customer satisfaction. So this shows how, as agent satisfaction improves, turnover goes down. So that brings us to our last polling question of the webcast, and the polling question has to do with agent job satisfaction. Here's the polling question. Do you track agent job satisfaction in your call center? Well, this is popular. We're up to over 50% already. So do you track agent job satisfaction in your call center? Okay. We're up over 80%, so if you want to weigh in on this, please do so. Do you track agent job satisfaction in your call center? Okay. So I'm going to close that poll and then share the results with you. 39% of you are tracking agent job satisfaction. That's good. 52% of you are not, then another 10% not applicable. For those that aren't tracking it, I want to encourage you. This is low-hanging fruit. It doesn't take much time to put together a short survey. What does sometimes complicate it, just to give you it's kind of a real-world factor that sometimes plays a role here, when human resources gets involved in wanting to run the survey, develop the survey, it tends to take a lot longer. If you can do it on your own within your call center, just put together a short survey. As I mentioned earlier, no more than 5 questions, the most important question being overall, how would you rank your job satisfaction here? But you have to ask them about training. You have to ask them about career pathing. You have to ask them about coaching. So no more than 4 or 5 questions. The ultimate question being overall, how satisfied are you? Rank them on a scale of 1 to 5. Survey once a year, maybe twice per year. It doesn't have to be a big bureaucratic deal. It's pretty straightforward to put one of these surveys together. It's pretty straightforward to administer one. And the benefits, oh, and I should mention as well, make sure you include a free-form section on the survey that gives the respondent an opportunity to not just give you a score of 1 to 5, but to elaborate. You know, tell us what you think. What can we do better, and what are the things that we do well? Oftentimes that part of the survey is the most insightful. So if you are going to create and administer an agent job satisfaction survey, make sure you do leave space for the agents to elaborate and kind of give you, the lowdown. What do they really think about working in the organization? Okay, we're going to move on now, and we're going to look at training hours and what impact that has on agent job satisfaction. And if we take a look at agent training hours versus agent job satisfaction, this is annual training hours. As the number goes up, so too does agent job satisfaction. And the reason is that if we put all of these KPIs together, what drives agent satisfaction is the quantity and quality of coaching, whether or not there is a documented bona fide career path, and the amount and quality of training that they receive. So agent job satisfaction is not something that just happens. Agent job satisfaction can and should be proactively managed. These are the levers you use to manage agent job satisfaction. So what this chart shows is the build that we've just been through. We've got our foundation metrics up here, driven respectively by utilization and first contact resolution rate, and then we've got this tertiary set of metrics. And we've got this cascading effect here where we can see which metrics drive which other metrics. You can see that almost all the metrics are interconnected in some way. And if you understand how they are interconnected and interrelated, it gives you a lot of power because it enables you to pull the levers that you need to pull to achieve desired outcomes. You want to improve cost, take a look at utilization. If utilization is low, a lot of times it's because your service levels are too aggressive. If you're trying to improve customer satisfaction, look first at FCR, first contact resolution rate. If that isn't good, you typically are going to need some training to improve the FCR, and or look at how you can manage agent job satisfaction more effectively. This is a very powerful chart because it really does show which levers you can pull to achieve better outcomes on cost and customer satisfaction. Now, the reason we went through all that is because we need to diagnose why this service desk has high cost and low customer satisfaction. Now, remember, cost is driven by agent utilization, so let's look at that number. Agent utilization for this service desk is 46.7%. The peer group is at 53%, okay? We also know that agent utilization is driven, in some cases, by service levels. So let's look at those service levels. The ASA is 18 seconds. The call abandonment rate is 2.9%. The peer group is at 45 seconds ASA and 8.1% call abandonment rate. So when I asked this company, the service desk manager, why do you have an 18-second ASA and a 3% abandonment rate? The answer was our CIO wanted us to keep our ASA under 20 seconds and our abandonment rate under 3%. This is a classic case of somebody mistaking good service levels for good service, period. The two are completely different. Okay, so our advice is you got to back off on these service levels. You don't need an 18-second ASA. You don't need a 2.9% abandonment rate. The reason your costs are high is because your utilization is low, and the reason your utilization is low is because you simply have too many people. You've had to staff up to keep your ASA and your low and your abandonment rate low. Well, if we look at their turnover, it's about 30% per year. It's a little bit less than the benchmarking peer group. This is a high turnover industry, as I think most of you know. Now, the good news is if you've got to downsize, if you've got to attrit, you can get there through turnover. You don't have to lay anybody off. You don't have to tell anybody they don't have a job anymore. And what this organization did is they did attrit. They didn't backfill any people that they lost over about a 4-month period of time. And within 6 months, within 180 days, they had gotten their utilization back up to about 55% through attrition. That reduced their cost per contact to around $20, and their service levels floated up. They got to about a 50-second ASA, and their abandonment rate went to about 6%. So a pretty straightforward solution there. It's very easy once you understand how these KPIs relate to each other. Now, what about customer satisfaction? You may recall that their customer satisfaction was on the low side, but we also know that customer sat, big driver here, first contact resolution rate. So let's look at that metric. First contact resolution rate at 51.3% compared to 71.2% for the peer group. Why might that be? Well, FCR, one of the big drivers, is the amount and quality of training that you get. So if we look at their training hours, new agents got 36 hours of training. Annually, they got 12 hours of training compared to the peer group at 79 hours and 34 hours, respectively. So the short story here, which was the same as the long story, is that you need to invest more in training. And specifically, you need to emphasize the importance of first contact resolution rate. You need to make that investment in training, focus on first contact resolution rate. They did exactly that. And again, within about the same period of time, 180 days, they improved their training, and their FCR went to about 75%. Customer satisfaction within that period of time got to slightly more than 80%. See, if you understand how these KPIs relate to each other, how they're interrelated and how they're interconnected, it's usually pretty easy to diagnose what's going on with an organization, and hence relatively easy to put together an action plan. So that's what we want to talk about next, is the action planning, what we call the prescription phase. Now I'm going to show you 4 charts here that address performance measurement, human resource management, contact handling, and technology. Now, I'm sure you've heard the paradigm people, process, technology, which is a way of saying that people are at the bottom of the pyramid. They're the most important. They will drive the processes, and your processes will drive the technology decisions that you make. And that's the order it should be in. You want your people driving the process and the process driving the technology. But we believe that there's even a more fundamental building block, and that is KPIs or performance measurement. Because if you don't have a solid performance measurement and management system in place, it's very difficult to achieve excellence because you don't know how to measure excellence. You don't know how to define excellence. So we believe that the pyramid actually has a more base block, and that would be performance measurement, and then people, process, and technology. Now, let me explain what we've got on these charts, and I'll use human resources as an illustrative example. What I've shown are some best demonstrated practices or best practices in human resource management. This is not a comprehensive list, but it does represent some of the more common best practices around recruiting and training and career pathing and retention, coaching and feedback, and performance standards. In the second column from the left, I've written out in longhand, if you will, a description of the best practice. So when it comes to retention, world-class organizations have formal strategies to maximize retention. They're designed to improve job satisfaction, loyalty, and thereby maximize morale while minimizing turnover. Okay, so we've got the shorthand on the left column, we've got a broader description in the second column from the left, and then we've got up here in the upper right what I call the affected KPIs. And I've listed a number of important KPIs here, including business effectiveness metrics. So we've got cost per call, customer satisfaction, agent utilization, first call resolution rate, and so on. At the intersection of each of these KPIs and the best practice, there will be a cell. That cell will be either white, light blue, or dark blue. If the cell is dark blue, it's an indication that the KPI is strongly affected by the best practice. If the cell is light blue, it's an indication that the KPI is slightly affected by the best practice. And if the cell is white, it's an indication that the KPI is unaffected by that best practice. Now, here's the value of this. These 4 charts represent a cheat sheet of sorts for the industry's best practices. Because if you go off and you do a benchmark and you find that your cost is high, your customer satisfaction is low, utilization is not good, first call resolution rate is not where it needs to be, and so on and so forth, you can look at these charts and very quickly come up with action plans that address performance measurement, human resource management, contact handling practices, and technology to understand what the action plans might look like to improve utilization, to improve call quality, to improve your handle time or your turnover. So if I, through a benchmark, find that my FCR, my first call resolution rate, is not where it needs to be, what this says, and it makes perfect sense, is that training that is focused on first contact resolution rate is likely to improve that metric. Likewise, if I go down here, I see that just having a performance standard for FCR, establishing a target like 75% or 80% or 85%, oftentimes goes a long way towards improving that metric. Absent any other changes, just establishing a performance target on a metric oftentimes has the effect of dramatically improving that metric. So again, white cell, little or no cause-effect relationship. Light blue cell, some cause-effect relationship. It's the dark blue cells where you have the big impact on the KPI. So these represent sort of cause and effect diagrams. The metrics up here are the ones you're impacting. The best practices are the way to improve those metrics. Now, I've lumped the business effectiveness metrics over here in the right-hand column together because they tend to move together. By contrast, the operational metrics, which I've shown in the first 8 or so columns over here, do not necessarily move together. They tend to move independently. But business effectiveness metrics, again, tend to move together. So this set of charts can be informative in terms of coming up with action plans for improving your overall performance. What levers do you have in performance measurement? What levers do you have in human resources and in your processes and procedures and in your technology to improve these affected KPIs that are listed in the upper right-hand quadrant? Let's look now at implementation. This is really where the rubber meets the road. And for those of you who were around in the 1990s, you may recall an ad campaign, a pretty famous ad campaign by Nike called Just Do It. It profiled athletes, runners and jumpers and swimmers and hikers in doing what they do best, which is climbing a mountain or rappelling down a cliff or jumping hurdles or pole vaulting. And the ad was just do it, and then they'd show the Nike swoosh. And it was quite inspirational. It was a very effective ad campaign. It ran for years and years and years. And I borrowed this because when it comes to action, that is implementation, there's really no better advice I can give you than just do it. If you're measured effectively and you've gone through a benchmarking exercise to diagnose strengths and weaknesses, and you've gone through the process of developing an action plan, then at this point, you have no choice but to do it. You have to recognize that call center best practices are a holistic discipline, and the near-term goal should be improved performance. The ultimate goal should be world-class performance, but the key to getting results is to take action. Now, there are a few other things that can be done to facilitate this, to sort of motivate action, if you will. And what I'm showing on page 71 is an action plan that was put together by a client of ours a number of years ago, and they plotted on the top, one of the charts you saw much earlier in this presentation, the 3 stages that call centers tend to evolve through. The newest and least evolved tend to operate very chaotically in the support stage. Those that begin to make investments in improving their performance and becoming more preventive and proactive and strategic operate in this transitional stage. And those that have evolved the furthest operate in this strategic paradigm where they are all about being preventive and proactive and adding value on every single transaction so that customers develop loyalty and stickiness to this channel. Now, this call center was in pretty bad shape when we started working for them at the beginning of the year. Again, this was a few years back. And they put together an 8-point action plan as shown here. The first thing they were going to do is document all their call handling standards. They put in place a balanced scorecard about a month later. 2 months later, they started surveying their customers. A month after that, they put in place a formal agent career path. 2 months later, they started doing root cause analysis. They then put in place a set of agent performance standards. They changed their IVR menus to make them more intuitive. and then they put in place, I think it was Witness, a call monitoring program. In the course of about 11 months, they really did evolve from being a reactive stage support center with not very good performance metrics to a strategic stage contact center that was adding significant value to the overall enterprise. And again, this chart simplifies what they did, but it really wasn't that much more complicated than what you're seeing here. Now, it's also, for many organizations, important to sort of prioritize the action plan because you don't want to bite off more than you can chew. And there's actually 3 dimensions that are shown on this 2-dimensional chart. The 2 obvious dimensions are the impact any given action item will have, higher impact versus lower impact, the relative cost of any given action item, higher cost up here, lower cost here, and then the urgency as represented by the color. That's the 3rd dimension. So we look at action item number 1. Okay, pretty high impact, not a very high cost, and it's high urgency. That's probably where you're going to start. By contrast, look at action item number 7. Doesn't have as much impact as action item number 1, but it costs a whole lot more, and it's not urgent. So you're not going to be looking at that one right away. The point is you can use a chart like this to help phase your action plan, help phase your implementation plan so that you are focusing on the prototypical low-hanging fruit or the prophetic low-hanging fruit, the big bang for the buck opportunities. And that is important. When you start moving ahead with any initiatives to improve your contact center, you need to show results right away. So what you don't want to do is start with a great big project with a lot of uncertainty and a lot of cost and something that isn't going to show any kind of payback for months and months or even years and years. You want to start by hitting singles. Look at the things that you can do in the near term that don't cost a lot of money, don't take a lot of time. Start putting some points up on the board. Start showing that you can make some real improvements vis-a-vis these initiatives. Now let's keep in mind that it is important to drive accountability. That is to establish performance goals within the organization. What I'm showing in this example are 2 sets of performance goals, one related to the call center overall, the second related to agents. Now the reason you do both is because call centers are not living, breathing entities. They can't be held accountable for anything. However, agents can be. So what we've got here are a set of call center goals, but you have associated agent goals. And presumably if the agents or most of the agents meet their goals, then the call center will also meet their goals. But accountability is a critical concept in world-class call centers. You need to have KPIs to define your goals. You need to measure your baseline performance, which you can do through benchmarking. Typically you want to establish some stretch goals, but you have to drive these performance standards and goals down to the individual agent level. And on that note, the balanced scorecard that I introduced to you much earlier in today's presentation can be repurposed and applied to your individual agents that work in the call center. This particular scorecard has 7 metrics on it, and keep in mind this scorecard would be created for each agent either on a monthly or a quarterly basis. We look at a productivity metric like how many contacts do they handle, customer sat metric, which assumes that you can trace customer satisfaction back to individual agents. We look at their productivity, we look at their first contact resolution rate, and then we've got some subjective metrics down here like teamwork and initiative and mentoring. Now we weight each of these metrics according to their relative importance, and then we score them. Even on a subjective metric like teamwork, we can create a scale of 1 to 5, where 5 says you're great, 1 says you're not so good. Mentoring, scale of 1 to 5. Now what this does is it objectifies what is otherwise a very subjective process. Now any of you who've been involved in delivering feedback, certainly all of us have been involved in receiving feedback, but oftentimes these sessions where you're being evaluated are very subjective. Now it's like, well, I think you did a pretty good job, but I think you could do better in this, that, and the other thing. The scorecard objectifies the whole process of delivering feedback to the agent. So when you sit down monthly or quarterly with this scorecard, there's no surprises because the agent knew exactly what they were going to be scored on. They understood the algorithm. And when you sit down and talk about, here's your performance, you did a great job with customer satisfaction. You did a great job with first contact resolution rate. You did a great job with mentoring. Where you need to improve is on inbound contacts handled. Your score was under 50% there. Technician utilization, you're just not using your time effectively. And on initiative, I'd like to see you take more initiative. Now, many call centers go a step further. They don't use this just for delivering feedback objectively on a monthly or quarterly basis. They will also post the scores in an obvious location. You clearly don't put the names on here. You don't want to embarrass anybody. That's not the intent. But this is valuable as a motivator. Because if an agent's consistently scoring down here and not doing so well, they need to know that, because they're either going to get their act together and start performing better, or they are going to self-attrit out. They will decide, this just isn't the job for me. You know, I've been working hard and it's just not happening, so I'm going to go find something else to do. And that's not always a bad thing. You know, it's better that if they self-attrit out, that is, make the decision that the job is wrong for them, then it gets to the point where they have to be written up and warned and eventually terminated. And so what this posting does is it creates, I think, visibility into how each agent is performing relative to the other agents. And again, typically the names are not listed here. And I realize that this practice is controversial. However, it is becoming more and more common. And I would say about a third of MetricNet's call center clients are now using a mechanism like this. They've got a monthly scorecard that they review with each agent, and then they post the monthly ranking so that each agent knows exactly how they stack up. They can see, you know, over 6 months, how have I been performing? You know, what's my average score? What's my current score? How do I rank in, you know, amongst the 25 or 30 agents in this particular call center? Again, I'll admit that this is somewhat controversial. Not every call center is comfortable with this, but in terms of driving accountability and delivering objective feedback to agents, it's an outstanding tool. Let's talk a little bit now about what you can do going forward. We've discussed today a 4-part model that looks at metrics, diagnosis using benchmarking, prescription, and implementation. Let's review that real quickly. In terms of KPIs, you have to recognize that less is more. Remember the 80-20 rule. There are both operational metrics and business effectiveness metrics, and at least on the operational side, I've provided you with a short list of metrics that you can use to manage your call centers internally. The business effectiveness metrics largely dependent upon the business that you're in. On at least an annual basis, you ought to be benchmarking your call center versus a valid peer group. Use metrics identified in this webcast to identify performance weak gaps, both positive gaps and negative gaps, and diagnose the underlying drivers of those performance gaps. That exercise we went through a few minutes ago looked at how the KPIs impact each other and allowed us to diagnose why that service desk had high cost and low customer satisfaction. And the diagnosis was pretty simple. If you understand how the KPIs interconnect to each other and impact each other, it's pretty simple to do that diagnosis. Once you've done that, you want to develop action plans based on the gap analysis and the call center best practices. Go after the low-hanging fruit. I've made that point. Do what's realistic in the near term, but every action has to have the effect of either reducing costs, improving customer satisfaction, or enhancing revenue production. If it doesn't do one or more of those 3 things, it's worthless. You just don't do it unless it's going to cut your costs, improve customer satisfaction, or drive additional revenue for the organization. Then finally, put your plan into action, but build buy-in right up front, assign ownership and accountability, monitor your progress, but you should expect positive, measurable change. And I've talked on and off throughout this presentation about the importance of benchmarking and how you can get real, positive, measurable change in the near term. If you move down this path and you start implementing some of the ideas that have been presented here today and you're not seeing results within 90 days, something's gone wrong. It doesn't have to take that long. So you should expect and see positive, measurable change. The bottom line is this. Now, the call center is being managed as a strategic asset within the enterprise. Historically, it was managed as a support function. Increasingly, it's being managed as a function that can drive value within the organization. It can differentiate your company's products and services. It can create loyalty and switching costs and give you a competitive advantage. Now, strategic call centers have a number of success factors in common. The first is that they are viewed and managed strategically as a source of competitive advantage, and the investments are according to that. In other words, they're not managed to minimize cost. They're managed to maximize value. And oftentimes that means higher levels of spending to fund technology initiatives, to fund training initiatives, to fund additional headcount when and if needed. They understand what it means to be world-class, and I presented that definition a couple of times. They look to add value on every transaction, and ultimately what they're after is customer enthusiasm. They use their performance metrics not just to track and trend performance, but they use them to diagnose strength and weakness. They benchmark at least once a year. They invest in training, coaching, and career pathing for their agents or technicians. And they have a bias towards action. That is, they've bought into this idea of continuous improvement. And there's one thing I think that differentiates world-class call centers more than any other. It's the fact that they do have a bias for action. So let me give you 5 ideas on how you can move forward. First, you can visit our new website and become a free member. You can connect with us through social media. You can sign up for future webcasts. You can go to our resource library where once you become a member, it's a free membership. You can download to your heart's content, take everything you want, and consider purchasing a MetricNet call center benchmark. Now, first, I want to encourage all of you to look around our new website at MetricNet.com. As I've mentioned a couple of times, one of the unique features of the website is that we do offer a free membership that gives you unlimited access to our resource library. This includes our metric of the month, our webcast recordings, white papers, and presentations. All you have to do is complete a short form, and you'll be enrolled as a free member. And each time you visit our website after that, you can go directly to our resource library and access all of the content online. I want to also encourage you to connect with us on social media, where we put out a steady stream of information that call center and IT support professionals may find useful. We have 4 LinkedIn groups as well as a LinkedIn company page. We also have 4 Google Plus communities and a Google company page. We're active on Facebook and Twitter, and we have a MetricNet YouTube channel. In the copy of the presentation itself, we've provided links to all of our social media pages and groups. Don't forget to sign up for our upcoming webcast next month. We're going to cover one of the most popular, we're going to address one of the most popular topics in our webcast series, which is the Zen of support. And then going into 2014, you can see that we've got free webcasts scheduled every month going out to about May or June. These will always be free, and we want to encourage you to go onto our website and sign up for those webcasts. Also, our resource library, feel free to browse through that. On our website, you'll find a number of white papers, presentations, magazine articles on call center benchmarking and industry best practices. And for those who are interested in benchmarking, there are 3 ways that you can complete a call center benchmark or a service desk or a desktop support benchmark. First, we have what are called our peer group benchmarks. These are our custom benchmarks, and they're very comprehensive in scope. The peer groups are selected based upon your organization's scope and scale and complexity and geography. For example, there's comparability in the number of contacts handled, since call centers are very scale sensitive. So you do want to select a peer group that has a similar contact volume to yours. You want to select a peer group that is in your geography and in most cases in your vertical industry. Now, secondly, you can also, if you're only interested in industry benchmarking data, you can download an industry benchmarking report directly from our website. You can just go to MetricNet.com and click the Shop selection in the upper navigation bar. You can see it right here, and you'll see our industry benchmarks that are available for download. We have them for 3 areas: service desk, desktop support, and call center, and a multitude of different geographies. And finally, for those do-it-yourselfers, you can purchase a benchmarking data file in Excel format and conduct your own benchmarking analysis. Now, you can reach MetricNet at this phone number in the United States. It's 703-992-7559. You can also fill out a contact form on our website, or you can just send us an email at info@metricnet.com. Now, for those who have time to stay on for a few more minutes, I will be answering any questions that you typed in during the webcast. And for those who must exit the webcast at this time, I want to thank you for attending the session. I hope you found it to be informative and insightful. Please remember to complete the brief survey that pops up when you exit the webcast. This is a requirement if you wish to receive a copy of today's presentation. So thank you once again. I'm going to take a look at the questions that are queued up. Okay. I want to make sure I get to where I left off before. Okay, from Tim. Can you provide an example or 2 of how you might determine the cost per contact in a help desk or service center environment? Yeah, what you have to do is add up all the costs associated with your service desk. This includes the agents or technicians' salaries and benefits, also the salaries and benefits of all the indirect personnel. That includes your workforce schedulers, your team leads, your supervisors, your trainers, your QA, QC people. You add up all their salaries and benefits as well. Then you have to look at your facilities cost. If you're not sure what that is, you should check with either HR or your facilities department. Normally they can give you a cost per square foot, and you want to add that into your total cost. You want to add in your telecommunications cost, your technology expense, your travel, your training, your office supplies. It's a fully loaded cost. And then what you want to do is divide that by your total inbound volume or outbound volume, depending upon what type of support center you operate. If you're talking about a service desk, it's typically inbound, and you're going to have inbound calls, voicemails. You might have chats. You might have web tickets. You might have emails. So you're going to be looking at all inbound volume. So you divide all costs by all inbound volume. And if you're in North America, the average is about $22. That is, if you look at all costs divided by all inbound contacts. But it ranges from a low of around $4 or $5 per inbound contact to a high of more than $100 per inbound contact, really depending upon the complexity of what you're supporting. As handle time goes up, so too does cost per inbound contact in a technical support center. Some technical support centers, if you can even call them that, do nothing but password resets. Their handle times are short, their costs are low, like $3 or $4 per contact. By contrast, if you're supporting complex business applications where your handle times get upwards of 30 minutes or more, it's not unusual to see a cost per contact of $30 or $100 or more. Okay, from Porter, how do you get to the weighting of metrics for your balanced scorecard? Any guidelines? Yeah, Porter, it's a judgment call. We put more weight on the more important metrics. You'll see in the scorecard examples that I showed that cost and customer satisfaction have the highest weightings and the service levels have the lowest weightings. There's no right or wrong answer, but you do want to overweight the foundation metrics, which are cost and customer satisfaction, and then the underlying drivers of those, which are utilization and first contact resolution rate, those also receive a disproportionate weight. It's things like it's the lesser metrics like the service level metrics that are relatively unimportant that you don't want to put a lot of weight on. So it's really a judgment call, but once you fix the weights or decide on the weights, you don't want to be changing those in between updating your scorecard. You want to keep those weights the same for at least a year so that you get consistency in the scores that you're coming up with and you can track those scores over time. Okay. Do you have a short survey that others are using so that we can be sure we're asking the right questions? That question was from Margie, and I'm not sure if, Margie, you're referring to an agent satisfaction survey or a customer satisfaction survey. The short answer is yes, we have both. You can also find standard examples of both agent and customer satisfaction surveys on the internet. Okay, from Carla, for staff surveys, are there certain open-ended questions you recommend to avoid? Yes, no, and I don't know responses. Well, when you're talking about agent surveys or technician surveys, those surveys are pretty short. And I think every question should have a response. I mean, after all, they only have to put a number 1 through 5 to a question like, do you feel like you get adequate coaching? Do you feel like there's an effective career path for you? Do you feel like the training has been effective? And overall, I mean, there's a limited number of questions, and so there's really not an option, in my opinion, for the agent not to answer those questions. What they might not do is provide any elaboration in the free-form field where you ask them to add anything else about strengths or weaknesses in the call center. There are going to be some that leave that blank. That's their prerogative, I suppose. But on a short survey, when you say certain open-ended questions, none of the questions are really open-ended. There's just one open-ended question at the end of the survey that asks them to provide any additional insight or commentary that they would like to about their position within the organization. So we found, Carla, that it really is not an issue. Okay, Bernard has a very similar question. Do we have sample agent job satisfaction surveys? The answer is yes, we do. You can also find those online if you Google, agent job satisfaction. Let's see. Someone asked here about the chat webcast. Want to remind everybody who's still on, and it's nice to see that most of you are still on and listening to the Q&A. We're doing a joint webcast next week with Baumgar. It's on the 19th of November, and it addresses chat and the success factors in implementing chat. So for those of you who are interested in driving volume through your chat channel and maximizing the effectiveness of that channel, I would encourage you to go to our website and sign up for the joint Baumgar MetricNet webcast on chat. Again, it's next week. It's the 19th of November at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. So I hope some or all of you will choose to sign up for that webcast. Okay. Let's see. It looks like there's a couple more questions here. If you have any questions, please type them in. From Gene, do you recommend a dedicated training staff, and if so, do you have any recommendations on what to base the size of that staff on? Gene, it really depends on how large your call center is. If you've got 25 or fewer FTEs in your call center, I don't think it makes sense to have dedicated training staff. Most of the training you can find from a third party, either CBT, computer-based training, or if you need to bring instructors in, you can find those on the open market. When you get above 25 FTEs, I mean, we've seen call centers even up to 100 or 200 FTEs that don't have dedicated training staff. They just continue to buy their training resources on the open market. Like I said, there might be computer-based training that they can purchase, and then when they need actual instructors to come in, they will simply hire those instructors. However, when you get to a certain size, it generally becomes not only more economical, but more effective to have full-time trainers within the organization. Now, the number of trainers that you need are going to depend, A, on the size of your call center, and B, the turnover that you experience in your call center. If you've got, a 500-seat call center and your turnover is 10%, which is pretty low, that means that 50 new people have to be trained every year. And that might be broken up into 4 or 5 classes. So you got 10 or 12 people per class that need to be trained. I could make an argument that says, that's not a huge training workload, and I'm not sure you need a full-time trainer for that. I could also make the argument that says, well, I think it would make sense to have a full-time trainer because they're going to learn the business, they're going to develop training materials that are specific to this business, and I think it would make sense. So it is a judgment call to a certain extent, but some of the factors that influence or impact whether or not you go the route of having full-time in-house trainers versus using external trainers on a contract basis depend on the size of your call center and the turnover of your call center. Generally, the larger the call center and generally the higher the turnover, the more sense it makes to have dedicated internal training staff. Okay, are there other questions? Please type them in if you have any other questions. If not, looks like I've answered all the questions, or at least I hope I have. I just want to thank all of you once again for attending today's webcast on call center best practices. I really appreciate this opportunity to meet with all of you and talk about our call center best practices. I do hope that you found today's webcast to be informative and insightful. Thank you very much. Goodbye now. Please don't forget to fill out the survey when you leave the GoToWebinar. Goodbye now.